So our last talk is by Kit Prendergast. Her talk is titled Designing Seed Production Areas for Pollinators.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I am here in Australia and it is 4:45 a.m. So apologies, I'm probably not looking as bright and sparkly as I usually do. So I am coincidentally uh, in a seed production area. I just turn off my video if I can. I am in a seed production area, which I will get to shortly about what exactly they are. So seed production areas are something that are so important for restoration. So there's a lot of research on producing seed for agricultural reasons, but seed can also be produced for restoration, whether it be restoration of areas after they've been mined or restoration along roadsides and to restore areas with native vegetation. Of course, you need quality seeds. And for some plants, you don't want to be just going into the wild and harvesting seeds from wild populations because you could be depleting the seeds from those populations so that they can't regenerate. So, seed production areas are where they've harvested some seeds from wild populations and then they grow the plants in dedicated areas in rows, sort of like a agricultural area, but it's less monocultural. You might have, say, 20 rows of one species and then 20 rows of another species. And they're planted with like different provenances, and the seed is harvested from areas that have ideally good genetic quality. But the thing is, you want to have high quality seed for many plants, especially flowering plants. That means that you need pollinators. And so you've got this dedicated area, and you can't just assume that the pollinators will be there. And so that is the research that I've been working on with Greening Australia. So I'll just a little bit about me. I am a Australian native bee scientist, and my research started off on bees in urban areas and the impact of the introduced European honeybee on native bees. And since then, I've worked on ecological networks, on the impact of fire bees, bee hotels, taxonomy. I've got a new species being described that's coming out in less than a month, so stay tuned. I'm really excited about that. Um, and I also do ecological consulting, bee biodiversity surveys, and a lot of SciComm as well. So if you want to follow all of that, there's my socials. So here's an example of a seed production area, which is where I am right now. I am in what's called a donga, which is essentially a box with a bed in it. But this image is the area that I'm working in. So you can see the rows, and they're going to have uh, plants of different species. As I mentioned, they're all native species. So that's what I find really exciting, that these are areas that are dedicated to wildflower production in a sustainable manner. Um, and so we, of course, need to have the pollinators in these areas. And you can't just assume that pollinators are going to be there or that they'll come there. Um, Pollinators need more than just plants, they need other resources. And so I've developed with Greening Australia a framework on how we can design seed production areas to promote both the seed production, pollination, as well as the pollinators and wider biodiversity. So we first need to know who the pollinators are. And in Australia, at least, there's been very few studies that assess who the pollinators are of wildflowers. Um, especially in terms of pollination. So pollination is a very complex process. Just because something visits a flower, it doesn't mean that it's actually the pollinator, but that's a good first step, the proxy of what visits. Um, and of course, this can vary by location, by season, um, and as if you don't have that information, you can sometimes infer from a related um, plant, so a plant in the same genus, because very rarely do insects specialize on only a single plant species. So even if they're specialists, they'll often visit plant species that are in the same genera. But that's the first step. You want to know who the pollinators are. And taxonomy matters. So there have been, quite a few studies that have been very, very broad, like, oh, this plant is visited by bees or little black bees. And that could mean so many things. And the problem with this very broad approach that doesn't consider taxonomy is that, say, so this little diagram that I created, and these are all black bees, but they have very different nesting habits, specialization, ecologies, ranges. So when we're doing pollinator studies, it's really good to, uh, include taxonomists in your research because, identifying species is super important for this. And the research that I did quite a few years ago, where I was surveying the pollinators of a critically endangered plant for the first time, one of those species that I found is the one that's I'm describing. So you might even find undescribed species, which is almost certainly in Australia, many undescribed native bees. So very important to actually consider taxonomy. So once we know who the pollinators are, um, and are they present in an area, and then how can we promote them in this area as well? So once we do that, we want to know if they are generalists or specialists in their foraging, and also if they have other food requirements in their life cycle. So that can make it a little more tricky, but the first step is generalist or specialist, and that can influence, for example, companion planting. So that's in a um, SPA, seed production area, whether you've got some plants that aren't your target plants to be harvested for seed, but you're going to plant these companion plants to support the other food requirements of the pollinator. Um, is there overlap between your pollinator and your target plant? If there's not complete overlap, you want to make sure that your pollinator has other food resources that they are able to access outside of the flowering of the host plant. And then, is the nesting requirements for your pollinator known? And again, if not, which is the case for many native bee species, we've found the nests, we can often infer from related species where we do know that information. So putting it all together, we created this flow chart and a case study. So Hakea is a amazing genus in the family Proteaceae in Australia, and it's got these like really interesting flower structures, and they smell beautiful. And so I looked at whether the pollinators are known or Hakea, based on what we have. It's called Atlas of Living Australia, and it's museum records and verified iNaturalist records and records from other citizen science apps all fed into a source, as well as some surveys that I've conducted and recorded insects on Hakea. And then based on this, I looked at whether their distribution overlapped with where the seed production area is. For some like undescribed species, don't know. So that is another issue with undescribed species. So you can see there's Euhesma J1. If we don't describe species, we can't map the distribution. So again, taxonomy is so important. We need to invest in that. And what do they eat? How specialized are they? And what do they nest in so that we can provide nesting resources for them in and around the SPA. So you might have seen the first aerial photo. There's not many trees here at present, so that could be something moving on if we're finding that certain plants that are hypothetically pollinated by above ground cavity nesting bees aren't here. Should we plant more trees? Should we install bee hotels? For the cavity nesting native bees, there is quite a bit of bare soil around, and I have seen quite a few ground nesting bees. Sorry. So companion planting, as I mentioned, they're not used for harvesting the seed, but they can ensure that the pollinators have the other food that they require. For Hakea, we can look at how the companion plants overlap and also the potential for facilitation, or there is also the potential for competition. So that's something that needs to be investigated. Like with agricultural crop plants, having other plants in the landscape often can boost insect numbers, but there is also a chance for competition where the insects prefer the other plants, which is especially the case in some of the research I'm doing, than the crop plant, which is fine. It doesn't mean that, just because something isn't pollinating a crop, that we should take out these wildflowers. But yeah, companion plants. And they are really important if you've got a target seed production plant that, say, only offers pollen. So in Australia, we've got a lot of acacia, which are these typically yellow, fluffy flowers. They're super diverse, over 1,000 species, and they're in the family Fabaceae. So they fix nitrogen. They grow very rapidly. They're invasive in some other countries, but in Australia, they're native, and they're often used in restoration because of those particular traits. But they only offer pollen. They've got extra floral nectaries. For ants, they've got these really cool ant mutualisms, but obviously, you can't just have acacia in an area and say, oh, we're going to be able to support pollinators, because obviously the pollinators need nectar as well. So you need to have nectar producing companion plants. So balancing that. So take home messages. It's really important to consider pollinators when designing seed production areas. Many plants, we have limited data and limited data on the other foraging requirements and nesting requirements of our native insects. So we also need to consider the location, the arrangement and composition of focal and companion plants to facilitate the pollinators. If you'd like to learn more about the research that I've been doing, I do have a Patreon, which you can subscribe to there. And so, yeah, I'd just like to thank Greening Australia for supporting the research that I've been doing in this area and having me come out here in this really cool landscape and see all the amazing pollinators of their seed production area.